Hi, this is Doug Howard, president of Growth Team Strategies, with another episode of Selling the Dream. Today I have with me again and always Kathy Fleck, one of our senior consultants. Kathy, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm doing well. And I'm going to enjoy the topic we're going to talk about today because, sometimes I have a really negative orientation. I like to be a grumpy, curmudgeonly. And today I think we need to talk a little bit about things that you don't want to do, promises you don't want to make, things you don't want to say to back yourself into a corner before you really know what you're going to do with your business. That sometimes people don't even realize that they're doing, that they're saying, right? So I know we've talked about this in other contexts, but sometimes someone will say to me, well, I want to sell my business, but when I do, Harry gets 20%. Or, I've already promised it to one of my kids. Or someone thinks they've been promised something that really the owner doesn't even think they've promised. And over the course of time, especially when you're working in a company, maybe if it's a small company, you feel like you're making some sacrifices because maybe your salary is a little less than it might be if you went out to the marketplace, or maybe the company doesn't have all the benefits, all the bells and whistles you could get somewhere. You start to maybe feel like, yeah, but I'm earning my way into an opportunity.
Right.
And it seems like when these situations happen, a lot of times they really limit the options that a business owner has when they get ready to sell. So did you experience any of that in your world when you sold? I know I had a little bit of that in the world that I was in when I sold my business. And what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure you've seen that phenomenon.
I have. Yeah, I have. And well, first of all, I knew I couldn't sell it to anybody who was working in the business. I knew that they didn't have the business background. They didn't take the initiative. Probably wouldn't have had the money. I was really hoping, and I think this is where a lot of people come from, is that someone's just going to fall on your doorstep. I had hired some new production managers over time, and I thought, oh, maybe this one could take over the business. And I think our mindset is that this would be a nice way to do it, an easy way out, a good transition. But I don't think it's necessarily the best solution, whether it's somebody who's been around for a while. I mean, until you're ready to sell the business, anything can happen. I've seen one company where the person wanted to have an employee buy it, and the person ended up getting sick. That didn't work out. Somebody else wanted some employees to buy it, and then life changes came up, and one of the employees decided it wasn't going to work. Or maybe they don't have the money. What happens if you decide to finance it and they don't pay you, or they make changes you're not happy with? There are just so many things that come up. And if they just do it, I'm going to say by the seat of their pants, I think they're just opening up the door for lots of problems.
Yeah. And it's a shame because sometimes I think it's born out of a very good natured enthusiasm. I've heard people say even to family members, like, someday all this will be yours, or, when I retire, you can step in, and I've heard people say that to people they're not related to. But what one person may be saying is, what I'm saying is, at some point, Kathy, you may be eligible to make me an offer and pay me a lot of money to buy my business. And what you might have heard was, boy, when Doug's done with the business, he's going to hand me the keys, and I'm really earning my opportunity to step in and sit in the in that seat, right? And
Yep.
so, because there's a big difference between becoming the king because the queen died, or because, which is, I don't know why I always go to Prince, well, now King Charles, right? With my examples when it comes to succession. I think just because I watched such a long period of time, like that had to be the longest succession plan.
We don't know anything different.
Right. But it's like, but there's sort of like, no, when that happens, you get all this. Like, we know that ahead of time. And I think that's sometimes how, family members and leadership team can think, oh, like, well, I'll just get it one day. And then sometimes I have people say, like, yeah, but I'm the older one, or I've been here longer, and
I'm doing
none
all
of
the
that
work.
lends itself right to who is the right person to step in their role. Do they have the financial wherewithal to do it? Do they have the business ability to do it? And right, what happens is because these conversations start informally, all of a sudden there's a bunch of things that have either already been promised,
Mm-hmm.
or there are certain options that are off the table, and we haven't even gotten out of the gate yet, right?
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes wishful thinking on the seller, the business owner. It just, I don't know why the thinking goes that way, but I think it is that it's just, well, this employee should have it because he's doing a good job. What is the business worth? Should you be selling it for this amount of money? What's going to happen to the rest of the employees? What's going to happen to the clients? And I think not that when somebody sells, they certainly are out the door if whenever that time frame comes, and it's really up to the buyer. But I would think that good business sense would direct the seller to make the best possible decision, not just an emotional one, but a more objective decision as far as who really qualifies in all those categories.
Right, right. So, what do you think? I mean, I know we've each had our individual, and I had a successor, and that
Hmm.
didn't pan out, right? And so we've each had, our experiences, but we've also known a lot of other folks. So, if you have a going company, and maybe there's a family member that works there, maybe there's, like you said, a dedicated employee that's been there for a long period of time. Um, and so, from that standpoint, what are some suggestions you would give a business owner not to find themselves in one of these unenviable situations?
Well, if they're going to pass it on to somebody that they know, and let's say somebody who's working in the company or a family member, I would think there should be some kind of qualifications. And so whether they do an evaluation on what responsibilities that person handles or the successes they handle. So let's just say it's a salesperson. Can the salesperson then manage people? They can bring business in, which could keep the business going, but can they manage the people? Are they good with people? Or if somebody is good with people but can't sell the business. So I don't know, I think for me, somebody who is more of a general manager who has already had responsibility successfully handling a lot of the areas of the company, if the owner decides to pull back a bit, maybe only work 3 days a week, take longer vacations, kind of see how it works when that person is not around, that could give you a good idea as to whether the successor could work.
Yeah. And don't you think it's important to be clear about the fact that, you know, I think way too many business owners in those conversations gloss over the fact that when they transition the business, it's actually going to be a sale, not a
Yeah,
gift.
I think so. Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
sometimes it is a gift, right? And that's, when that happens, that happens. But for the people that say, we've talked before about people identifying how much money they need to get out of the business when they sell it and how to maximize that. If you need to get money out of the business or just want to get money out of the business, you got to make it very clear. No one's just walking in here,
Yeah.
right? And there's going to be a transaction. One of the things that I always find eye opening is when we find sometimes we'll work through the transition process with somebody that has identified a successor, but they don't have a good process to go through.
Hmm.
And we'll meet with the owner and we'll meet with the intended successor. And then I start saying things like, well, if you're going to be the successor, if you're going to take over the business, you have to have a certain financial base. You have to have good credit. You have to, and all of a sudden it's like, well, why do I need that? They're going to give me the business. And well, A, no, they're not necessarily going to give you the business. But B, even if they give you the business, you still might need to have enough credit to go out and buy a
Hmm.
pickup truck,
Right,
right?
right. And I do think that even if it's a family member, there should be some skin in the game for whoever's buying the business. Even if the business owner doesn't need the money, I think that's just part of good business is to have, let's say, a younger son or daughter, whatever, to be able to put some money in, even if they're borrowing the money and paying back the parents on a regular basis.
Yeah. I also think it's a really, and I may be thinking about this because of the number of kids I have. I got a lot of kids, right? And so, and when I sold my business the last time, most of them were too young, but none of them really had an interest in the business. Of course, that's because I made the accounting business seem completely miserable, which it was. So, but let's say
Was
I sell the business I have now that I actually like, the consulting business, right? Like, I think it's important too to not be in a position of, well, I'll give Johnny 30%, and Susie 18%. And I, I think that is a no-win position
Yeah,
for
I
the
do too.
business owner to be in, whether it's to their kids or a family member or a leadership team. I have so many people that say, like, I'm going to take these three people and each give them a third. And it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
I
that
think
to me is like
somebody
a
has
bet. What's that?
somebody has to be in charge,
Somebody
and
has
it
to be in
needs to be
charge, and they
clear.
need to put the dynamic of their company together by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I say, like, listen, if your four kids or four of your kids are interested in being business owners in the business, let them go figure out what that relationship would be, the structure would be, and
Mm-hmm.
come back as an entity and make you an offer or take
Mm-hmm.
you through those discussions.
That's a
But
good point.
it's just a no-win situation. The other thing is, like I said, I see it with leadership teams a lot. Someone will say, "Well, he sells, and she handles production, and the other one does accounting, so they'd be great together." And it's like, well, first of all, no one knows if they'll be great together.
Right.
Even if one of them owns 51%, to me, creating a partnership for somebody else is like creating an arranged marriage. Even though they might work once in a while, like
Mm-hmm.
it's not the best way to go about it. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah. And maybe I think I like that idea of the example you gave with the four employees to be able to put together something themselves, and that'll also show how they would end up working the business because that would continue that structure of something that they agreed upon.
Well,
Or it could
yeah.
show that they really could not work together at all, and that would be clear.
Well, no, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, if we can't get that far, right? How are you going to run this business,
Mhm.
for 20 odd years into the future? And I think also there's a very difficult factor when you start splitting up ownership, right? So when I bought my company, I bought it with two partners, which was a mistake. But anyhow, um, but I did, and I thought I needed to because I didn't have a lot of financial resource at the time. I think I was 32 years old. I might have had $100 in the bank or something like that. Business was selling for $1 million. I'm like, I'm probably going to need some help here.
Yeah.
As it turned out, I think the owner would have probably financed it for me anyhow, and we would have been fine. But at the time, we brought on two partners. But the interesting thing was we all worked for the company, but we had three very different roles in the company.
Hmm.
And, I was the president of the company, one was a regional manager, and one ran one of our departments. So there were very distinct, roles and responsibilities. Also, we were coming from different pay structure. Right? So I was, making about, I don't know, 10, 15% more than the person in the middle. And then the other person was making about 10 or 15% less. Well, now all of a sudden the conversation is we all own the company. We should all make the same. We should all make decisions. And it's like, okay, but we're going from a structure that worked right now to a completely different structure. Now, not to say it couldn't work, and I may have felt that way because my particular role was I was running the organization and making the most. So
Right.
it seemed like every conversation we had, I took a step in the wrong direction,
Hmm.
right? But it is interesting when you look at it and say, you know, if I'm a 25% owner of a business, does that mean we all get paid the same? Or does that
I
mean
don't
we all take
know.
25% of the profit? But if
Yeah.
someone's a project manager and someone's a salesperson that does, $4 million a year in sales, does their base pay have to be the same?
Yeah, I think those would be totally different because you can look at industry standards to see what people are making, plus you can look at what their salary background is. And so if they're already working in the company and what they were making and they were still working there, I think it should go into the profit too.
Well, where the hell were you when I was negotiating my business? You could have helped me.
I didn't know you.
Yeah. Well, that's no good. That's your sales, right? So, but yeah, but I think when I look at it, I would bet 2/3 of the people I talk to, the owners are just like, we're all in it. And it's like, and they think that's a way to avoid difficulty. I actually think it's an incredibly easy way to create difficulty,
I do too. I do too.
So,
I'm going to say difficult for people to understand all the questions that they need to ask at the beginning. And people that I've talked to and given my unwanted advice or whatever to them, and then they start looking at all the different hurdles that I bring up, they might think, oh, I didn't think about this. I didn't think about that. Plus, I have no clue as to what kind of issues that they're going to run into that would be different from my experience. So there's just a lot of unknowns. And I just think the advisor part can help them prepare for it so that, I mean, they basically, I think, have a responsibility, the owner, seller, to the rest of the people in the organization and their clients to be able to get that set up so that, I mean, you can't control what they're going to be doing once they buy it, but to set it up in the best scenario.
Yeah. And so I think, and kind of boiling down a couple of things, right? One is, don't be cavalier about making comments
Mm-hmm.
that could potentially be construed as promises later on, right?
True.
And I think, secondly, understand that prearranging something for somebody else is pretty risky business. You know what I mean? You got to really let that bubble up to the surface on its own. But the third thing is, I think very early on, if you really want to do right by a loyal employee or a family member that you think may be a candidate to own your business one day, you have got to be honest with them very early on
Yeah.
that they need to be financially sound. They have to, establish good credit. They really need to develop their skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big part of it is just being clear. If it is your intent to sell the business one day, you need to be clear that that's your intent, not just that there's going to be a transition.
True. I agree with that, especially with family members.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
So, I think these are things for people to think about. I'm guessing as some people will be hearing this, they're going to think like, oh, I already did that thing they just said not to do. Right.
Well, I don't know if you can undo it, but you
Yeah.
might be able to
Well,
have
and
rethought it.
the earlier you do, or the earlier you start reshaping those conversations, the more likely you'll make it get to a good outcome.
I
So,
agree.
all right. Well, Kathy, I really appreciate your input and your thoughts. I'm really looking forward to the first episode where you totally, completely disagree with everything I say. I think that will be when we win the Academy
Okay, well, we'll see how we can do that.
or what I don't know what awards they give for podcasts, whatever the podcast award is. But until then, we will leave this episode in sync on this particular advice. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your input.
But
Yep. Selling the Dream, the world's best podcast for people that want to eventually sell their business, in my humble opinion. We'll see you next week.
thanks, Doug.
Thank you for listening to the Selling the Dream podcast starring Doug Howard and Kathy Fleck. Both Doug and Kathy have built and sold successful businesses and hope this podcast will help other small business owners do the same. Tune in every week to hear more tips for increasing the value of your company so you get the highest return for your years of hard work when it comes time to sell or transition your business. Can't wait till next week? Check out our website for more information at www.growththemes.com.